Hi, and welcome back to Prepared SLP about your Grad Apps 101. We're now in Unit 2, selecting the right programs. So what we're going to be talking about in this unit are things like the location, different clinical opportunities, funding, attainability, and then your carryover task for the week. So quick news alert. You have a tool at your hands that is going to be your new best friend when it comes to looking at different schools. ASHA EdFind. This is a resource that ASHA provides. It gives a summary of each program that's affiliated with speech pathology. Let me go ahead and just show you what this looks like. So in your handouts, you'll get the link to ASHA EdFind. What you'll be doing is you'll go to ASHA, see what you're looking for. So let's say University of Iowa. You can search it and it'll give you the different programs that the University of Iowa has within speech and hearing sciences. So doctoral degree, your AUD, bachelor's. Let's go ahead. We're going to click on the master's clinical entry level. It gives you information here about where the college is, the website, email address if you need to contact the program, their accreditation, so fully operational and compliance with standards with ASHA, then some general information, admissions information. So this is where you might really look at things like your GPA range. How does your GPA compare to what the average GPA for admissions is? What type of materials are requiring of you, letters of rec, sample essay, bachelor's degree, and then even statistical information like how many people applied and how many people got in, how many people got funding. So lots of really great information on ASHA EdFind. I really encourage you to explore and utilize this resource throughout your application process. So returning back to our presentation, what we'll be looking at next, where do you want to live? So I don't encourage you to apply to any schools where you think, I just couldn't live in this state or in this city. Make sure it's somewhere that you really do want to live. One thing to think about, this is kind of my last bullet point, is you might end up being in this place longer than you think. So for example, University of Iowa, I was in Iowa City for 7 years total by the time that I got my bachelor's, my master's, and then completed my clinical fellowship. You might want to consider that as you go in. You'll be getting to know different clinical opportunities, different clinicians in the area. So really pick somewhere that you think I could end up here, or on the other side, I really just want to spend time for 2 years in this certain cool place. You also want to consider in-state versus out-of-state tuition. So in-state at public universities tends to be much cheaper than out-of-state. You also want to think about different housing opportunities. So if you have a relative in the area, could you live with them throughout grad school and save some cash? Or are you going to have to rent an apartment, get roommates, etc.? That goes into the cost of living. So housing, transportation, food. I've included in your handouts a cost of living calculator. I encourage you to kind of do a cost comparison between where you live now and where you're applying to, just to make sure that you're not exceeding that cost of living and that you're not going to be caught off guard if you do move to a certain area. All right, next up, clinical opportunities. So this is the area that I feel like is most important when it comes to your consideration for graduate school, but also the one that most students don't really understand fully as they're applying to graduate school. So number one difference in clinical opportunities are whether or not the graduate program has what we call an in-house clinic versus externship-based practicums. So in-house clinics, University of Iowa is a good example of a university that has in-house clinics. So at Iowa, during my graduate experience, we were placed on different teams. We had supervisors that were experts in that certain area. So for example, in the fall, I might have been on the fluency team and the autism team. And I had 2 different supervisors that were experts and could give me feedback throughout, really focusing and narrowing in on a certain population for each semester. I truly enjoyed that because I felt like it gave me really good feedback from these experts. Their main job was to be a supervisor rather than a clinician. So they were giving us feedback, looking at our SOAP notes because they had time to. That was part of their requirements. Whereas if you have an externship-based practicum where this is going into the community, going to say a pediatric outpatient clinic and shadowing and working with an SLP there, those SLPs, that's their job, is to be a speech therapist. So they're not going to have quite as much time to give you that direct feedback. They'll give you that information, but it'll be having to, sneak it in between different patients, maybe at the end of the day. So keeping that in mind. Now, there are pros and cons of each. Again, in the in-house clinic, you're getting that more specialized kind of care focus throughout each semester, but you're also not getting out into the community and meeting more speech therapists or seeing some of the kids or adults that are in your community. That externship-based practicum, you're really going to get more of that experience in the quote unquote real world, seeing what it's like in a day to be a speech therapist, what those productivity standards are, working through it that way. So it's kind of like a siloed experience versus being thrown into it right away. Different things to think about too are things like your connections to medical facilities. So does the university have a hospital affiliated with it? If it does, you might have more opportunities to go and do more medical-based practicums. If that's something that you're interested in, I would highly encourage you to look and see what kind of affiliations or what medical experiences your programs have to offer you when it comes to that clinical practicum. The other thing are things like specialty track opportunities. So again, University of Iowa, they have different specialty kind of events that they put on and different seasons. They have Listen and Speak Up, which is a program for kids with cochlear implants, where you work with audiology students during the summer to really help make sure that these kiddos are getting what they need. They also have a fluency camp. Other programs might have other specialty events or activities, or even specialty tracks in terms of, here's how to manage autism, or here's how to manage speech and fluency disorders. Each area, each program probably has their own thing. So make sure that you look into that, see what they consider their unique opportunity that they're going to present to you. Funding opportunities. So graduate school is expensive, unfortunately. Lots of different ways that you can get funding. Academic-based scholarships are the quote unquote easiest way to get funding. Obviously, you put in a lot of work if you are getting academic-based scholarships, but those are things that might be offered to you from the get-go when you get accepted. Tuition scholarships cover tuition, maybe not so much the cost of living or a stipend. Graduate assistantships are quite nice. I had a graduate assistantship throughout my experience in grad school, which helped with tuition. It also provided a living stipend as I was going through grad school. Research assistantships are often available. So if you're someone who enjoys research, that's something great that you can look into, often similar to graduate assistantships and what they provide you. And then even outside department opportunities. So you don't have to work within the CSD department. I've known students that have graduate assistantships in the sports field. So make sure that you know whether or not those are available, and then also chat with the department, email them an inquiry about whether or not that's something they're okay with. If they're okay with you going outside the CSD department to pursue some other graduate assistantship. Attainability. So this is where you need to be realistic with yourself. What's the reputation? What's the competitive status of the programs that I'm going to apply to? Am I, a 3.0 student applying to the #1 program? Odds are you might not get in because their GPA is typically higher for those programs that are higher ranked, things like Vanderbilt, those top 10 programs. Can I get in? So that GPA, the GRE score, your resume, your cover letter, your recommendations. Now do keep in mind, GPA and GRE can play a role when it comes to those more objective measures, but your resume, your cover letter, and your recommendations are really going to make a big impact too, if you can get some strong materials sent out. And I hope to help make sure that you do get those strong materials sent out. So thinking through your carryover task for this lesson, I want you to narrow down your desired geographical locations. So really think hard about, where do I want to live? Whether that be, I want to live in this cool place for 2 years, or I want to go here because I think I could live here for 10 years. Then use ASHA EdFind to help search those programs in that area. Research the program's websites and investigate those different clinical opportunities. Think about in-house versus externship-based, the different clinics around the community, things that they have to offer. Keep in mind that if you can't find this information about, say, in-house versus externship, you can email the program to inquire about that. Make sure that you use the email template that I have in the handouts, or modify and make it your own. You can also use ASHA EdFind to determine whether your application meets kind of those standards, the average criteria for people who are admitted, for your GPA, GRE, etc. And then at the very end, your goal is to select 5 to 10 programs to add to your application list using the application tracking background information sheet. And we'll go over that in just a moment as we review your handouts. Now, I will say I applied to 5 graduate programs when I applied to grad school, and that felt like enough. Depending on what your application looks like with the strength of their GPA or GRE, you might up it to, 8 or so, but know that that's a lot of money. It's a lot of time. So really just make sure that you're narrowing down on those schools that you're excited about, that you can truly see yourself attending and enjoying. Let's go ahead and look through our handouts. So starting here, we have our handout looking at ASHA EdFind, your cost of living calculator, and then different example programs. So I use University of Iowa because that's what I'm familiar with. I'm also familiar with the University of Arkansas's program here in Fayetteville. I've worked very closely with them throughout clinical practicums for their students. So take a peek at those websites, see what you can when it comes to finding that information about the in-house versus out-of-house experiences. The next page has just your checklist. And then finally, we have an inquiry email that you can send to a program if you are wondering about their practicum experiences. Now, another resource that I'm having to share with you here, I really wanted to make sure that as you were going through the program, you were going to be able to use a tracking sheet so that when you're taking care of each of those applications, you know exactly what you're doing. So that application tracking sheet will be separate. If you open it in the Excel Google Doc, you'll see that it has the information on where to track the information about the program. And then even further down the process, things like have your essay writers submitted their essays, everything you could possibly need will be in that tracking system for you to use. As usual, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email at preparedslp@gmail.com. Thank you so much for spending the time here again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.